In the UK, every day on average there is 7.8 billion US dollars worth of economic activity. This activity includes things such as purchasing your venti mocha iced latte, or your workplace buying 100 new ink cartridges. And all of this economic activity relies on infrastructure to facilitate it. Without it, the coffee beans for your previously mentioned mocha iced caramel coffee would never even be able to make it into the country, never mind to your insert brand coffee shop. Infrastructure isn't just roads, rails and airports, but also seaports, internet, the electric grid and water. And as Britain's economy grows, the infrastructure capacity must grow with it. So the question is presented, how does the UK expand this infrastructure, and how does it do it most effectively? Well, British infrastructure relies on both private and public investment to increase capacity and maintain it. In 2016, the government funded 65% of all infrastructure investment, with the rest coming from the private sector. However, the construction and repairs of this infrastructure is contracted out to the private sector. This is mostly due to the fact that private companies are almost always more efficient and lower cost. As for the other 35%, this is mostly in areas such as energy and internet infrastructure. However, some of Britain's largest and more traditional infrastructure is privately owned, such as Heathrow Airport and, until recently, the Severn Bridge. I can already hear you bellowing the question at me, why is this the case, shouting at me like an economics-themed Dora the Explorer. The answer is profit. Generally speaking, a company's only goal is to generate profit, and so if they think they can build or operate this infrastructure at a lower cost than the government, or if they think there is enough demand for a particular asset as to make it worth investing in, then they will. That's the whole reason these institutions and large companies are willing to pour hundreds of millions of pounds into building these expensive pieces of tarmac and steel. Except, this private investment into infrastructure only started again recently in the UK, with privatisation of many industries and assets under Margaret Thatcher in the 80s, and this is carried on into the current day with privatisation of things as mundane as the Royal Mail. Consumers typically benefit from this private construction of infrastructure as they get to use it for cheaper than if the government just built it themselves and funded it through their taxation. And as mentioned earlier, in exchange, these companies get their juicy profit and a pat on the back from their board members. Except, it isn't always so simple. Some economists believe that infrastructure possesses positive externalities, which essentially means that society or a non-affiliated third party benefits from its consumption or provision. Stuff like education is typically seen as having positive externalities, as it leads to less crime. The argument is that the improvement of infrastructure can have positive externalities like improving land values around it, improving speed of research, spread of knowledge, and can also have positive effects on other goods that themselves have positive externalities, such as making education easier and more accessible, or improving the speed and quality of healthcare, both of which have very well documented positive externalities. This leads to the heated debate of whether infrastructure spending and investment by the government should increase as to amplify these positive externalities and to reap the other benefits, such as more job creation, opportunities for investment, and the injection of money into the economy. The issue in this debate is whether this public infrastructure investment will create more growth than it adds to debt, or whether it is stifling more effective free market solutions. The British government takes an interesting approach to this. Its policy is a mixture of the two. While some areas of infrastructure are nearly entirely privately operated and invested, like internet infrastructure, the UK does things differently when it comes to more traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges. The best example is the already mentioned Severn Bridge. This bridge between England and Wales was privately developed and tolls were charged, just like any other toll bridge. Except the catch was that in 2018, after many decades of a private company running the bridge, it had to be handed over to the British government. Deals like this are known as public-private partnerships, In the UK, schemes such as PFI are essentially this. These types of arrangements have been used to create £55 billion worth of investment into infrastructure in the UK. However, in the modern day, these types of contracts simply use the single payer model, whereby the operation, finance, design and building is entirely done by the private sector and then paid for by the government on behalf of the public. However, many criticise the system as being inefficient due to, firstly, the cost of financing being significantly higher for private companies compared to government debt. Private companies often borrow at 6% and above, while the British government's current interest on 10-year bonds at the time of writing is just 0.2%. Secondly, the cost on these contracts is fixed, and once the government agrees, they are locked into paying the agreed sums for these projects until the contract expires, which is often decades. Both of these reasons can result in pushing a higher burden onto taxpayers. Not only this, but there are numerous anecdotal stories of basic maintenance in PFI hospitals charging taxpayers £200 each time they change a light bulb. This has led to many to argue, despite the fact that private run and constructed infrastructure is often vastly more efficient, its benefit is offset by these extortionate contracts and their comparatively weak financing. Many PFI contracts were agreed under Tony Blair's government in order to construct new infrastructure without showing an increase in public debt on paper. As of 2018, the government pledged to cease PFI and hasn't released any official statement on how they plan to build infrastructure in the future. Nonetheless, we can look at the currently under construction Crossrail and use its structure of ownership, funding and operation as an example of how future projects will be built. Crossrail is entirely owned by government entities, however, its funding is a mixture of private and public, with the vast majority of the funding being sourced from special rates and government funds, and the rest coming from major landowners. When it eventually opens, its service will be run by the local transport authority. From this it seems that the government is stepping away from using the private sector to facilitate the nation's growing demand for infrastructure capacity. Whether the UK will stay course or return to the private sector for this vital need is anyone's guess, especially in such times of turbulent policy. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section or any corrections to the information in this video. I know that perhaps there might be some statement from the UK government that I didn't exactly pick up on. For the next day I will be responding to any queries or debates. Thank you, don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this.